Welcome to Michigan's Great Beer State Podcast, brought to you by the Michigan Brewers Guild, celebrating 25 years of camaraderie. The Great Beer State Podcast shares the stories of our member breweries and the rich community of Michigan beer and brewing. Listen in, have a beer, and then check out mibeer.com for a full listing of member breweries, events, and more opportunities to explore and support the Great Beer State. Welcome to Michigan's Great Beer State Podcast. I'm Fred. I'm here with Scott, and we are jumping into the 6th episode of Season 3. We're going to visit with Stephen Roginson of Batch Brewing in Detroit. We're going to jump through another Brewers Dozen, circling the membership roles of the Brewers Guild and community for breweries that you should visit. And we'll start off. I'll hand it off to you, Scott. What else is going on in the world of Michigan beer and brewers?
Well, we will have, by the time this airs, we will have just been through the Spring Beer Festival that we're getting ready to do right now as we talk.
I heard it was a smashing success with
Yes.
beautiful weather and nothing but glorious smiles and the perfect number of people in attendance.
To be sure, everybody had a great time. There were a lot of terrific beers sampled by many.
Yes. About 100 breweries, I heard.
That's right. So yeah, it is big news for us. If you're listening to the podcast regularly, we continue to talk about it. But that's something that is a big project. All of our festivals are big projects, and to be launching a new one, the 5th in our regular lineup, is definitely noteworthy for this year and on our calendar of events. Makes me think quickly of the upcoming golf outing. We have the PAC that supports the Brewers Guild has an annual golf outing. This is the 2nd year, and that's coming up May 20th. So you can check out Protect Michigan Craft Beer, their website, and the golf outing goes to support the Political Action Committee, which supports legislators' efforts who are like-minded and think well of our industry and pursuits.
Yeah, and on top of that, we've got a Share Your Voice sort of campaign or program that's there to support our 25th anniversary celebrations throughout the year. We're going to have some big stuff going on at Summer Beer Festival, but right now we have a link at mibeer.com where we're asking for community leaders, brewery industry members, and enthusiasts. So that includes you, if you're listening, to jump on there, and you can send us a video or audio or a story that talks about what you love about Michigan beer, and you're able to wish the people of the Michigan brewing community a happy 25th anniversary and share a story about what makes it great for you. So check that out at mibeer.com. And unless you got anything else, we can jump into the Brewers Dozen.
Yeah, let's take a visit through a virtual visit or a verbal visit to our list of breweries with each episode. Again, this is to encourage folks to go out and visit a brewery they go to regularly. All of the brewery members of the Michigan Brewers Guild.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
It might have been my internet, but you dropped out there as you were saying. This is to encourage everybody. So I'll just make one of these, and if you just want to pick up and jump into that somewhere, I'll splice it together.
So this is the time with each podcast episode where we want to highlight more of our brewery members. We go through what we call a Brewer's Dozen. Usually we list 13 different brewery locations in Michigan, and we really hope that it encourages you to go to a brewery that maybe you weren't aware of, hadn't thought about in a while, or even if it's your local regular favorite, that you head on down there and get a pint of fresh local beer.
Absolutely. So I can get us started with Brickhouse Brews in Sparta.
And second will be Brick Haven Brewing Company in Grand Ledge, that's near Lansing.
And then we head over to Brickside Brewery in Copper Harbor.
Bright Eyes Brewing Company is in Kalamazoo.
And over in Kentwood, we've got Broadleaf Local Beer.
And Brooks Brewing is in Shelby Township.
With another location in Ferndale.
Bros Brewing is in Beulah, which is Bros is part of St. Ambrose Cellars, which makes mead. But they've got a nice little brewery there and offer beers.
And Burnt Marshmallow Brewing in Petoskey.
Berserk Brewing Company in Grand Haven.
And By George Brewing Company in Munising.
We have Cadillac Straits Brewing Company in Madison Heights.
And wrapping it up, we head over to Cedar Springs for Cedar Springs Brewing Company. So check them out, get a glass of fresh local beer, and support your community while you're doing it. So speaking of which, our next guest is Stephen Roginson. I enjoyed this conversation. I thought it was a deep look at sort of the experience, the COVID experience for a brewery owner, as well as some of the takeaways, and how I thought he shared a lot of detail about how his perspective on business changed through that. I thought that was an interesting, there's a lot of other history involved, and you'll get a lot from the story, I think, but that was one of the things I thought was interesting about this conversation. Was seems like he came out the other side of that with a renewed perspective.
I agree. And we've got quite a few stories, and we talked about wanting to document for posterity some of this time. Hopefully it becomes a unique time that lots of people want to forget or do forget about. The time of COVID and specifically being closed down. I think there are a lot of things that are important to remember. But Stephen tells the story, and everybody had to go through this of figuring out what their business really was and how it was operating and really what it meant. And he describes it as starting all over again, basically starting with almost a clean slate, except that the business was operating, and trying to build back and figure out what you are and what's important to you. And that means inside your building, what you offer, the people that work there, outside the building, the community that supports you. So he had a great conversation about that.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said too with all the COVID concerns. Our interviews that were between timelines, meaning after the original Rising Tide and really before the UP Fall Beer Festival, were primarily via Zoom. And this was an interesting recipe because we were in Detroit for the Fall Beer Festival, but this interview is after the festival in batch brewing. So there was a context there that I think created a different type of conversation, as well as we're sitting in the back room on a Saturday night while his staff fields the post-festival rush with maybe one person in the kitchen and AstroTurf in the parking lot under tents. And, they're in striking distance of the beer festival. So it's not slow. And so I think there was a lot of relevance in terms, at least for me too. I think it affected what he shared versus what somebody else might share in a quiet Zoom chat about it, as we were in the thick of it. So I think it's just a poignant example of just how much change we all went through, especially operators and communities. I think, we talked a little bit during the Brewers Dozen in the last episode, but I feel like he had some epiphanies that maybe everybody has at different points in the timeline. But this story, I think, illustrates how much the tasting room and how much that resembles or acts like a restaurant for a community, and how that has changed the operations of brewery owners, as well as maybe the thresholds and standards, and what how you're going to operate within our community has changed dramatically, with the tasting room becoming a local standard for communities.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what really makes local breweries in our industry great is that they're more than just a beer, and even more than just a place to get beer. They really do build community and are part of communities, and many of them have a restaurant and tasting room. Some just have a tasting room where you can have a pint, but it's a great place to socialize, to meet up with people, to meet new people. Lots of friendships have been forged with people sitting at their local brewery talking about, just getting to know each other over a beer. And that's something that community is something special about our industry.
Yeah, and I don't think there's ever one answer or one list of things that make a brewery special, and what make it different than a restaurant, and what make visiting them different than just supporting their beer. I don't think there's ever one answer, but I think this conversation certainly shares a lot in that realm of riffing on, there's something special about being a brewery, and sometimes it's when you feel it, and I think this definitely shed some light on it.
Yeah, and Stephen talked quite a bit about being really intentional about all these different elements. It's not just about my beer, it's about everything that's going on here, and it all requires focus and attention, and I think guests feel that when they get in the space.
Yep. So I don't think we need any more introduction. I think we can jump right over to Batch Brewing in Detroit, Michigan, just after the 2021 Fall Beer Fest in Detroit. We'll hand it over to Stephen. Enjoy the chat. Cheers.
Cheers.
Hey, Stephen.
Hey, how you doing, Fred?
Good. Nice to see you.
What a pleasure, right?
So we're just checking in. We're telling stories, sharing stories about the old days, the new days, the days in between. So I'd love to start just kind of here. Where does your beer story start? How did you end up? What started the whole process of you becoming part of this beer community?
Yeah. I started homebrewing when I was about 19. I was, as a younger lad, I was not into beer, like the kind of quintessential American lagers. I didn't particularly enjoy beer, and I had the opportunity to try some different things that piqued my curiosity, and I ended up working at a party store in Rochester Hills called Mr. Pizza Bootleg, and they were fairly early adopters in craft beer, and I got an opportunity to check some stuff out. There was a guy that worked there named Bill, and Bill was the beer and wine buyer, but also convinced the owners to let him sell homebrew supplies in an aisle. And I found it fascinating and a little bit, mysterious. And in some of the beer exploring, I discovered some beers by Unibrew from Quebec, but Maudit was the one that was like, all right, I need to know what this is. And I want to do this. I want to figure out it. And I started, dabbling and stovetop malt extract homebrewing. And, that was 1996 or whatever. And, fast forward, I was able to be around this, Michigan craft beer world, and I kind of slowly wound my way into it.
So what was next from, that inspiring some homebrew and maybe lighting a spark of like, oh, I want to try and make this? What was next in terms of that progression of getting close to industry members and maybe, seeing a possibility of doing it professionally?
You know, being a home brewer, I started to have a conversation with a couple of people like Tim at Royal Oak Brewing and I'm blanking. Rochester Mills. He was the president of the guild. Eric at when he was at Big Buck, and I just was kind of around that space, and I ended up in a career of beverage marketing. I was working for Vitamin Water, so I sponsored a couple of guild events. I was like the non-alcoholic, option, right? And I had the opportunity to, just to be around and Pat Scanlon, build a relationship with Pat, and just I was around the festivals and was amazed by the community, right? Fast forward to, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago, I moved to Detroit from the burbs. I moved into the city, and I wasn't able to homebrew anymore. I moved, from a house in the suburbs with a garage and a basement and a driveway to a loft, and none of the space to spread out and make messes. I realized if I wanted to continue this hobby, I had the kind of responsibility from, my now wife to not make messes in our domicile and maybe, do something cool, because there hadn't been any sort of like new beer in Detroit in many, many years, right? And I was originally trying to create a co-work space for home brewers, like a 4 or 5 setups that you could rent space to brew a beer, and we were buying ingredients together, and I couldn't find a way to do it legally down here. So I was going to open a real small, like almost speakeasy style brewery. I was working a ton and traveling 100 days out of the year, and I figured, I'd brew a barrel at a time, very nano, and I did a little crowdfunding campaign to raise some money. In the middle of that campaign, the job that I was working, that program was eliminated. So I went all in, and
what year are we talking about?
2012. 2012 is when that all went down, and then 2013 is when I applied to a business incubator in Detroit called Hatch Detroit. We won late in 2013, won a $50,000 prize, and bought this building that we're in now on Porter Street in early 2014, and then we opened in early 2015. So there was a hell of an arc to get it done,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like your idea and concept changed a little bit from once that big pivot happened. So tell me a little bit about what idea was kind of incubated and born in that project, and then how that transitioned to become what Batch opened as.
Oh, sure. Well, and it's funny, you think about it, there's been like 5 or 6 different iterations since then. It was going to be a real small, like I said, it's kind of a speakeasy, nano, my homebrew, real small scale. We're open when I'm in town. It was going to be kind of clandestine, right? Like small scale craft beer. And then it evolved into, well, we're going to do this full time, and let's figure out how much beer we can make to make this sustainable. It wasn't going to be at a different location. It was going to be on Michigan Avenue, about 2.5 blocks from here. And that evolved to me purchasing this building. And as opposed to being, a 1 or 2 barrel setup, we ended up buying 1,000 liter, like a 7-barrel hot side, and started with 4-barrel tanks that we've, then we moved to 7-barrel, and now we've got 15-barrel tanks. And food was never a part of our idea. Food was like, hey, maybe one day, or we'll get food trucks, or we'll do whatever. And when we shifted from our Michigan Avenue location to Porter Street, this place was previously a restaurant. So we brought Chef Matt Johnson to help us bring food, to life. And as opposed to it being this clandestine speakeasy little home brewer living the dream, to opening a pub scale brewery with an aspiration to do something bigger. And the industry has changed a lot since then, right? Mm-hmm. The idea of like open something, at this scale and then grow and grow and grow and grow and buy something else and distribute and get bigger. The market matured in real time in front of us. So we had to continue to, assess the opportunity. Like, is there even a demand for more of our beer, right? Is there even room on a shelf or in a bar, in a beer bar, for as much beer as being produced? And we distributed for probably about 3.5 years, 4 years of our existence. We'll be 7 years old in February. And man, this last year and a half of COVID has been our most, recent pivot. This is like pivot number 4. Mm-hmm. Reevaluating like who we are as a business, what we want to accomplish in beer. It's not, beer has been so, I mean this with due respect to all of my colleagues, like beer has been a very ego-driven thing. How do we do this thing, carve out a space, create the buzzworthy whatever to justify scale, to go to market bigger, to grow and grow and grow and carve out a space, right? But when you look back on the breweries that, at least for me, that left a mark, that inspired me to open a brewery, they're mostly brew pubs that made consistently good beer, that operated a great restaurant. They're not distributing. And I mean, I used to, play at New Holland back in the day when I was, in the jam band days, and clearly that brand went on one trajectory. And I played at Bell's, and that brand went on a trajectory. But I also played at all these other smaller places, or I have been party to watching this industry grow. And like the majority of the breweries in the state of Michigan, and likely in the rest of the United States, are more of an analog to what we do here. Less than 1,000 barrels, most of them less than 500 barrels. What are we really doing? We're operating restaurants that we make this other product line. We're not just making food. We're not just making sandwiches or making salads or making pizzas or whatever it is we make. We're also making beer. We came to it from making beer, but as a business operator, you're trying to be sustainable. You're trying to employ people. You're trying to be able to carve out an existence for yourself. And turns out the sandwich that we make is as important to the bottom line as the pale ale or the IPA or the whatever. So removing ego from the goal of what we're trying to do and focusing on making the best, fill in the blank, everything that we make is turned into the touchstone.
Yeah.
And that's where we've landed. In the middle of COVID, now what is the goal? To make the best and safest environment that people can enjoy the beer and the food and whatever. And I don't have all the answers to what that looks like. The next thing.
Well, I even heard when you were talking about the bottom line, like I felt like from your description, what you consider to be the bottom line is also different. That the bottom line is the experience, the takeaway, the impression, the contribution, more than it is a margin number.
Well, and the people also, right? The bottom line for people, like the people on your team, not only the people out in your dining room, but the people on your team as well. Like a year and a half ago, I had 27 employees. Right now, I've got 14. And every day that I walk in here, the question is, what are we doing to make sure that people that work here have the best opportunity for a sustainable lifestyle? So they're paying their bills, so they want to come back to work here tomorrow. Mm-hmm. That wasn't a variable 3 years ago. It was find the best person you can for the job, and if they earn it, you give them a raise. The environment for operating in this, I think of beer and food on a spectrum. They exist on the same spectrum. It's a movable, crossfader, but they exist in the same spectrum. And the food business has changed so dramatically in the last 18 months. You were aware of these murmurs of responsibility of businesses to their employees 2, 3, 4 years ago, an evolution of what it meant to be an operator in the space. But this thing is happening in beer at the same time. Along with COVID, like how do we operate in a way that the business is sustainable and we're facilitating a better opportunity for our employees to be able to live out a career in this space? And what does that look like for us? And I'll tell you right now, it can't be driven by ego. It can't be, I need to find the next cool idea that I'm either going to innovate or hitch my wagon to. It has to be like, what are we doing to make this place something that means something more important, something bigger to our community? So a neighbor might end up here 3, 4, 5 times a week, not because they want to drink our IPA 4 days a week, but because they have to be here, because there's an event, a show, a movie, a meeting, a community gathering. The community uses this place. Ideally, the community will use this place for their purpose. And my job is to supply them with the best product and service and experience possible so that we're able to be sustainable. In the meantime, quietly making the best beer that we can. It helps when you have somebody like Kim Schneider making your beer. And you have this, amazing Czech Pils, and you've got, the best fest beer that we've made in 7 years, and consistently great beer. Her and Doug, they're doing a great job. And now our job is to not ask only this question about like, what does our beer mean? More importantly, like, what does our business mean to the community? I know I can count on the beer being great.
Yeah.
Different. It's a totally different thing, man.
Yeah. And what I heard in that too, especially at the first part of that is you were talking about, instead of chasing the next big thing or the idea and thinking that, you gotta churn that out. And you were saying instead you're focusing on, supporting this culture of your employees and team members. And I just was thinking along the line as I was listening to that, funny enough, that sort of culture is what makes it a really rich environment for ideas to come forward. Like, you're more capable of finding that idea when you have this creative environment and everybody's feeling free and supported and comfortable. It's when the ideas come.
Right. And as a leader of an organization, you hope that that's what happens. Like, I have goals that a facilitated environment, right? A healthy environment for our team gets the best out of my employees for the organization, but also they get the best out of the organization for themselves. And if by proxy or as a result of that healthy environment, that a great idea comes forward and people are investing their creative all into their work moments, that something special happens, like, that's best case scenario. But in the meantime, I know with 7 years almost in hindsight of operating this thing, that like, I am not interested in like being captain of the hype beast. Like, that's not fun. Trying to like grab the tiger's tail all day long, every day, hoping to find like an access to a on-ramp of, I don't even know, energy and chaos. Like, I want to come to work every day energized to make great product, to make great experiences. And I want everyone on my team to feel the same way.
Yeah.
And if the brewers are showing up that way every day, and we have real conversations about the quality of the process and the product that we're making, and we're focused on lagers, or we're focused on, making beer to style, agnostic of all the, exciting stuff and, contemporary craft beer, people are going to taste that in our products. And it's going to be reflected in them coming back. And that's what I want. I want my employees and the guests to feel like they get to, experience a real and honest thing every time they get to pick it up. That's It is definitely an evolution from, what I thought this industry was going to be or what we were trying to do as a company or a brand. And like, I'm in, because of COVID, in this like re-startup mode. I remember when we started and I was here 80 to 100 hours a week. And then year 2, it throttled back to 68 to 80 hours a week. And that's kind of where I was hovering. And then COVID happened and I'm back to 100 hours a week. What I want is my employees to not feel like they're hanging on by their fingernails. And I want to feel the same way. I want us to like run a sustainable business that feels good. It's not exhausting. It's not like taxing our existence, to be able to operate. And while we're doing that, if we're, interacting with each other honestly and transparently and focused on making great product, it's going to come back to us. We're going to be excited about the beer we're making and the food that we're making and the events we're putting on, the environment that we're creating, and that's sustainable. I don't think right now that anybody that's coming into the craft beer industry is the next Founders, is the next Bell's, is the next New Holland. There's not that much space in the industry. That's not what is left on the table. So anybody that's coming into it has to come from a place of passion. Like, I care about the beer we make and I want to build a sustainable business. And if that's the baseline and that's what we're working from, and if that's my learning, if that's what I take away from COVID, that's what I take away from doing this from the last 7 years, I'm lucky. Because I get to come to this from a perspective of not hype beer, but like, let's make great beer and let's make great food and let's make great experiences and create an environment where the community gets to use this how they want.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'm curious, do you think the consumers, do you think their perspective of what a brewery is to their community, what their favorite breweries are to them, do you think the customers went through a change through COVID of reflecting on why this brewery is important to me or why I'm glad this brewery is in my community? Are breweries different businesses in the community than a restaurant? And did that perception change at all during COVID, you think?
Yeah, for sure. One of the big observed, takeaways from consumers during COVID is that people deeply care about establishments. They have emotional relationships to them. And Detroit has been an incredibly dynamic food space, liquid and food, like craft cocktails, craft beer distilleries, breweries. It's been a dynamic marketplace for the last 7 or 8 years. The exploration of the newest place, the newest thing has been a big part of what made the Detroit food and beverage scene exciting. And one of the big takeaways from COVID is that supporting the places that excited you 5 years ago, 6 years ago, something that you still came back to. Hey, I come back to Batch Brewing Company once a month. I used to go here every week. So much has changed in food. I explore all these new places and Chartreuse and Selden and, Chartreuse is opening, Freya and all the new food. By the way, every one of those places sells craft beer. They have great beverage programs, craft beer and natural wine and cocktail programs. COVID comes around and people re-explore those like emotional connections to these establishments and have absolutely made commitments to supporting them. It's actually, kind of reinforced for some of us that have been around for a while that are not the newest people on the block, that like we're important members of their community. And we've seen a lot of old school regulars coming back more frequently than they used to. That being said, I'm also worried about the new ideas, right? There are a handful of new breweries that have opened during COVID, like Loaded Dice in Troy, right? These places that are brand new, Mothfire, that are a year and a half or 2 years old, places that don't have a history of, customers to come back and support them. People aren't hunting the new in the same way they were. So I honestly don't know what the landscape looks like 12 months from now, or 8 months from now. Next spring, and like this like new normal that we'll be in by next spring, where kids have gotten vaccinated and people have gotten their third poke, and there's no more federal money to support what we're doing, and we're like, all right, we're back on our own again. I don't know what that looks like. I legit don't know. But I think consumers have had some real conversations about the places that are important to them, where they want to go and what they want to support. And knock on wood that we continue to be one of those places. So we've got a future for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about this last iteration of things. How did you respond and make it through COVID, and how was that reflected in today's version of batch brewing?
I was traveling. I was in Portugal in early March with my wife and my daughter, who's in college. It was her spring break. We went to Europe. A little getaway, a little reboot. And while we were in Portugal was when like COVID kind of became, the awareness of it became official and real. And, Donald Trump was like, any American that's not here by Friday at whatever, like you're not welcome back in. And we our flight back landed 9 a.m. We went home because we were traveling. We quarantined for 2 weeks. That Monday, Governor Whitmer kind of shut everything down, and we laid our entire staff off. What that set up for me was a scenario where there were a couple of weeks where I was licking my wounds, and I was really afraid of what that meant. I was afraid for my employees or for the loans I had personally guaranteed. Like, I didn't know what the future was going to be. And listening and studying and whatever, I knew that we were going to be operating outside. We had to. So I focused on that. I'm fortunate enough to have a fair amount of property here to be able to create space for an outdoor experience. And so that was what I focused on, was basically moving my entire business outdoors. I mean, what is the date? October 22nd, 2021. I think that's what the date is. I have not had a diner in our tap room since March 13th of 2020. That whole time, I moved everything outside. I know that we have to let people in soon. The patience for winter, the bundle up and stand around a fire and eat a sandwich that's quickly getting cold, like that novelty is not going to be the same this winter as it was. I know I'm going to have to let people inside, but my big takeaway from COVID was, how do I create a new environment focused on safety? And that's what we've focused on this whole time. I'm about to open the dining room for the first time in like 2 or 3 weeks, and everything's a shift. It was a bistro service the entire time we've been open. You waited in line to get a beer, waited in line to get the bat. Like, we're gonna have table service. It's gonna be scan a QR code. We'll bring things to you. We're gonna have, no communal dining for the next 6 months. Everything in here is communal dining. So, it's a brave new world. The whole thing, everything that I thought this business was going to be when I started it is kind of upside down. I thought I was going to open a brewery and do some pretty interesting packaging and move beer into the marketplace and do something creative and small disruption in the market. See what happens. I run a restaurant. Did not fucking plan on that, man. Did not plan that I was going to be a restaurateur. And that's what I am now. Luckily, the restaurateur is the background for what I think is the future of what we do, which is a community asset, right?
Yeah.
And we help launch other businesses, and we help, create a springboard into the marketplace for other people. And that's what I think we do. And it's been COVID, as scary as it has been, and uncertain and tragic, has also been like kind of exciting to take something that you've been running for 6 years and wipe it all aside and start with a blank sheet of paper and say, like, these are our assets. This is what we think is the value that we add to our community. How do we make what we do as meaningful as possible so we get to keep doing this for the next 10 years? That's fucking heady, man. Mm-hmm. So that's the way that I've approached it. Completely removing any sort of ego from the equation. How do we make sure that we get to be here tomorrow? And we get to employ people, and we get to make an impact on the community. And that's like the touchstone to what we do now.
Yeah, it's big stuff. It's powerful.
It's crazy.
Tell me about, you mentioned your origin story included sort of, getting in touch with members of the brewing community, and you were engaged with the Brewers Guild from your vitamin water vantage point.
Yeah.
And that draw of community was part of your part of that those early days. So what does the community, the brewing community, look like or mean to you now? Now that you're, now that we're here versus 10, 15, 20 years ago?
The brewing community now is a radically different thing than it was then. The time that I was observing craft beer in Michigan as, a layperson or as an aspirational, owner, or just somebody that was an enthusiast, it was nascent back then, right? There were these like ebbs and flows to craft being successful, and then all of a sudden it hit its stride. And it was very exciting. And that's when I'm planning my brewery, and things are really on an upswing. The community now has both more connectivity and camaraderie, at least my experience, because I'm around it, right? I have a different network in it than I did when I started. After 7 years, I know more people, and I have more access to be able to call somebody, but there's also more competition. And specifically, in the Michigan Brewers Guild, the thing has changed, right? Beer was on such a adrenaline high upswing. Everyone was being successful. Everyone was growing. Everyone was, doing better in all these new breweries, and the marketplace was changing, and the category was changing, and it was an adrenaline high. And over the last few years, right before COVID, things start to level out and things start to change. The community, I think, because of COVID, has hunkered down as more available to each other than it has been in a while. I don't know what craft beer looks like next year. I don't know what that means in growth and distribution. What I'm hoping it means is that we have a deeply reflective conversation about the opportunity for our industry to be sustainable. I think 95% of breweries end up being 500 barrels a year or less. How do we make it more possible, more likely for a 500 barrel brew pub, ostensibly, to be sustainable and be successful? How do we remove barriers and cost centers? How does a guild facilitate those places being, more solvent by creating co-op opportunities, or, just to make it easier to operate? and help ensure higher quality product. I said this earlier, I don't think there's another Bell's in the pipeline. I don't think there's another Parent in the pipeline. I just don't think that the marketplace has the bandwidth for that right now. So what does it have a bandwidth for? A local brewery that makes consistently great beer, consistently great cider, consistently great, wine or mead or, distilled, spirits, and creates a great environment. I think the future of craft beer is small, but I think that it's diverse. And I think that's when you end up with a batch brewing company in Detroit and a Barrel and Beam Holmes is a really interesting example of somebody that's newer and launch a new product line like Smooge. That's going to be awesome. That thing in and of itself will be big. It's an innovation. The brewery itself, is Holmes going to be the next 10,000 barrel brewery? I don't know. Probably not. But is there an opportunity for innovation and cool stuff? Yeah, but in the meantime, operating a sustainable business or that is meaningful to a community that makes consistently good stuff, I think that's the future of craft beverage in general. Whether it's a winery or a brewery or distillery, creating a place that the community can connect with and go and consume their product, food and beverage, is the future of the thing.
And in that, basically growing number of smaller operators, a high number of small operators versus a consistent number of operators making more stuff.
Right.
What do you think is crucial to a healthy community of supporting one another and the connective tissue between those operators? What do you think are the hallmarks of a healthy brewing community?
I think a healthy brewing community starts with healthy cultures inside of each of the businesses. I think that we need to be really deliberate about the environments that we are creating for our employees. Those employees are increasingly more female. They're increasingly people of color. They're increasingly people of different backgrounds. And to be inclusive and inviting to people of any gender or ethnicity or sexual orientation needs to be very, very deliberate. I think that if breweries want to be long-term sustainable, they need to probably look less obviously like you or I, right? Like dudes in their 40s and 50s with long hair and beards. It needs to be a place that everyone feels like they could imagine themselves to hang out. That the music and the art and the food reflect the communities that they're a part of. It's small, subtle things like that that make the likelihood that craft beer is not a trend. That it becomes and remains a part of the fabric of a community the same way that the pub culture is in the UK, or that it is in the Czech Republic, or that it is in Bavaria. They're places that have historical lineage that you went with your parents and you now go and everybody feels included. And I think long-term, what we're trying to do is make sure that we're community members and our craft is honored because we honor it. Choosing great ingredients, making decisions about who we want to be, and making sure that anybody that could work for us feels like they would want to work for us.
Yeah, and I hear that and saying that, in a way, if I were to attempt to paraphrase it, you're sort of saying that, hey, being a craft brewery is more than making beer. There are some cultural ideals that are often common threads in makers and in craft makers. And I'm hearing you at least champion that idea of, hey, as breweries, we need to be community members that are supporting those those ideas, being welcoming, being honest, being diverse. I mean, not being diverse, being open to diversity, being welcome in our establishments, both for employees and guests.
I mean, you came to craft as an idealist, right? Like, that's how we all got here. I think we can achieve a higher ideal if we aim for it, if we make it deliberately. That's why beer has become more interesting, because people have tried to do a better version of. Our product is not just beer, right? Our product is food. The food game is elevated. Our product is environment. The design is elevated. The materials that we use in places are different and nicer and more comfortable. The employee base has elevated, or needs to elevate. We're more inclusive. We're more inviting. The community that we're trying to create, every one of those things is a product line, right? But the whole picture is based on being an idealist. We want to create a more ideal space to sit and share and consume and make and enjoy. We're trying to do a better version of this thing that was available to us before. Mm-hmm. And I think the future of being a maker, whether it's food or beverage, is starting with this baseline of let's keep doing it better. And that's where craft beer came from in the first place, in my opinion, as a casual observer. Let's do this better than it was done before. Let's honor traditions that were better than what we're doing now, but do it in our own way. And I think craft beer has the opportunity to continue to reflect the greatest ideals. How do you reflect an ideal that you strive for? That's a conundrum, but that is the thing.
Well, I think that ideal is aspiration.
It is aspirational.
And it's saying, we're aspirational and we're going to keep striving is an ideal of saying we don't need to say, well, that's it. That's as good as we can be.
There is always an incrementally better version of what we can be.
Yeah. And I think that's what I hear you saying too, is that when you said, let's do it better, I think was the phrase you said, I heard you're changing what you apply to it.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, it's the fill in the blank.
Right.
It is 100 different things.
It may have started as beer. It can be bigger than that, right? It can be everything that you touch.
100%.
Everything that you hold dear, right? Let's do it better can apply to everything. And I think that's a curve, well, not to veer too much, but you've got me thinking about a lot of stuff, and it's like that's the curve that a lot of us went through no matter what year you came into it, right? So I just remember the breweries of the 90s, and it was like, man, we're about making beer. We'll get to food later. Here's a bag of chips.
Right.
And then that started to change. And then as those breweries grew and got bigger and had more guests, it's like, well, we can do it better. We can now food starts to be considered differently. And I think HR and company culture was like, well, we're just a ragtag band of, like a home for wayward brewers. We'll figure out the HR later. And that had some, unnecessarily rough roads because we weren't, I'm speaking very generally, but from my experience, companies weren't intentional. We were idealists that had cool company culture because we were cool people.
Not because we were deliberately creating.
But we weren't necessarily watching out for what could unintentionally be a threat to that culture.
Sure.
And so I just feel like the progression of our industry as idealist makers, and this is really just all that you're reflecting and it's landing with me, is that we keep stretching out the definition of what we can be passionately makers of. And now and through COVID, it's a reflection that it's everything, turns out.
It turns out it was everything the entire time.
Exactly.
But we have, through our passion, had myopic views of the things that we focused on. And the big takeaway from COVID is take a step back and look at what we're making, everything we're making, and create a thing that you want to come to and grind out 100 hours a week and you want to stand next to, and you want to, every hour that I am here is an hour that I am not at home with my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I better be passionate about it. Otherwise, it is a wasted hour. It's an hour that I'm not with my kid. It's an hour that I'm not doing something else. I got a lot of passions, as do you. You're a musician. You're a maker. You're an artist. There are a lot of places we get to spend our hours, theoretically, in our day. So it's important that what we're investing into this existence as both makers and operators reflect aspiring to a higher ideal.
Yeah. I think it goes both directions too. And I heard this in the earlier conversation, is you can apply that same idea of let's make it worth it. Let's make the time investment, the everything about, let's make it worth it. And I think you can flip that around and say that's the same question we ought to be asking and honoring about our guests. Right? Is they're taking time, and I think COVID really intensified this relationship of, people don't go out as often. We couldn't go out for a period of time. So that question of if I'm going to go out, where do I want to go?
Where am I going? Who do I want to spend my time with? Where do I want to spend my money?
That's now a trust question of, listen, I want it to be worth it. And so I think that's what operators and brewers, these cultural idealists, can say, how am I making it worth it? Can we make people really believe that it's always worth it?
Well, those are the two things, right? How can we do it better, and how are we making it worth it?
Right.
And if there are not two more, poignant and specific questions you could be asking of yourself and your organization as you strive to continue to exist and do this thing, I can't think of a more poignant question. Those two.
And they would apply to growth too, which is where you started with this about connecting it to ego.
Right.
And I say, well, if something's going to grow and cover more miles and more people, it's going to grow because it's a need, because more people know about it and believe it's worth it, and it's filling some void that isn't there.
Right.
Is when it grows. It doesn't grow because you really want it to.
Right.
It grows when more people say, I want some of that.
Well, as somebody who has been a marketer, sometimes growth is foisted upon people by cleverness and, positioning, but ultimately the most sustainable growth comes from a place that people are observing something that you did that's meaningful, right?
Yeah.
And I would hope that one of the big takeaways from this COVID era is that, meaningful takes a lot of different shapes, and it's not just something you're trying to capture and package and market and sell, but it's a moment. It's an experience, and it's not always neat and tidy, but it's really the thing that we strive for and we live for as makers and operators, creating moments and opportunities for people to just truly, densely live in a moment and experience a thing, like a true dense experience. And it's the difference between aspiring to scale and making a thing. And I just want people to love those moments densely. If I get to make more of those moments, if scale happens, that's great, but I want the dense experiences. And that's what turns me on. That's my big takeaway from all the pivots, is what do I want out of this? I want people to genuinely love it every time they do it.
Yeah, man. Well, I think it's really a lot of passion, a lot of great ideas, and I think I hope it's encouraging for anybody in the space, coming into the space, thinking about coming into the space of making, of brewing, Michigan, whatever. I think that's, those are ideas that are really can have a lot of impact on creating, shaping, and executing an idea. There's a lot here to think about, so I really appreciate you sharing that and contributing to our community.
Well, you know what? It's a lot of fun, over the many years you and I casually knowing each other, the way our paths have crossed, like playing music in, my band back in the day at your pub, and interacting with you at the Guild, and being able to have a reflective conversation, me 7 years into this industry, and you taking on a role of like observing and commenting and shaping, how we observe. Like, this is an important moment for us to reflect and do an inventory as an industry. And I appreciate being able to, like, after the first Detroit festival in 2 years, and the first time I've been out in the world with that many people drinking beer, to be able to reflect on that, 6 beers deep, this is nice.
Yeah, maybe we get to 7 or 8.
There you go.
Well, thanks for everything. And I don't know if you got any parting words. Somebody said, somebody came in here and said, man, I've always wanted to open a brewery. I think I'm going to try to open a brewery now. What would be your encouraging words, either towards their business itself and also towards kind of joining and being a community member versus another business?
I had the opportunity to do that yesterday. Jeff from Loaded Dice came in here, and he was reflecting on meeting me at an event 5-6 years ago when we first started distributing a little bit. And he's so passionate about his business, and he made 130 barrels last year. And I mean, as far as words of wisdom, you have to understand the economics of the business enough that you can be sustainable. But after that, I really hope that you're enjoying it. I hope that you get to enjoy all the little nuance, all the hard work, and all the moments of exhaustion, because what makes it worth it is that you're deliberately creating a lifestyle. This is not a corporate world. Nobody is coming into brewing and is going to work 9 to 5, 40 or 45 hours a week. That's not what this industry is. So you come here from a place of passion as a maker, and I just hope that people kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say give up or lose the allure of I think we're going to be the next big thing, and instead just I want to enjoy creating the place and the environment that I work and that I spend my time. There's a lot of shitty jobs out there.
Yeah.
And being in craft beer and being in this environment gets to be as beautiful as you want to make it.
Yeah, man. Here's to it.
Yeah. Cheers, man.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening, watching, and sharing Michigan's Great Beer State podcast, supporting Michigan breweries and craft beer everywhere. Interviews featured here have been included in the book A Rising Tide, Stories of the Michigan Brewers Guild. They'll also be in the Great Beer State documentary coming out in July of 2022. Visit mibeer.com for brewery information, beer festivals, and 25th anniversary celebrations. We appreciate the support and encourage you to like, subscribe, and give us a review. From coast to coast, from far and near, let's drink Michigan beer. Cheers.